The CAT 320 is like a muscle-bound, hot-tempered tough guy. The Komatsu PC200 is like a jack-of-all-trades businessman who is especially good at making money. And the Hitachi ZX200 is more like an engineer with glasses on. It is not necessarily the flashiest thing on the job site, but it is often the one that works the most precisely, runs the most steadily, and sits the most comfortably under the operator. Around 2001, Hitachi replaced the old X series with the all-new ZAXIS series, and the name ZX comes straight from the abbreviation of ZAXIS. It took over from the X200, but filled in the old weak spots like fuel consumption, comfort, and electronic control, and along the way kept stretching the family's branches longer and longer. To make sense of this whole clan, you only need to grab hold of one main line. That is, the standard and long undercarriage versions from the first generation through the 7th. The ZX200 and ZX200LC, the ZX200-3 and ZX200LC3, the ZX200-5 and the ZX200LC5, the ZX200-6 and ZX200LC6, and the current ZX200-7 and ZX200LC7. These 10 models basically sketch out the more than 20 years of development of Hitachi's 20-ton class. Each generation actually has quite a different personality. The first generation ZX200 came onto the scene around 2001, taking over the hydraulic foundation of the X200 and starting to make heavy use of electronic control, which made it something of a bridge between the old era and the new. The ZX200-3 from around 2003 is the classic generation in a lot of people's hearts. It was the one that truly sold Hitachi into China, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Africa on a large scale. And to this day, it is still one of the most common Hitachi models on the global used market, with quite a few machines still running on job sites after clocking 20,000 hours. The later ZX200-5 caught the craziest years of the global infrastructure boom, and in many countries, it practically became synonymous with Hitachi, holding a status like the PC200-8 does for Komatsu, or the CAT 320 DL does for Caterpillar. This generation also added an economy-oriented global version aimed at emerging markets with a Suffix G, and the manual stated outright that it saved roughly 9% on fuel compared with the ZX200-3, which is basically printing fuel savings right on the brochure. By the time of the ZX200-6, emissions and electronic control tightened up further. The cab got quieter and fuel consumption got lower, and many people consider it the most well-rounded generation overall. The current frontline workhorse, the ZX200-7, leans into intelligence with more electronic systems and remote management, and it can even remind you ahead of time where service is due. To sum it up in one line, the early ZX was like a seasoned veteran master, while by the 7th generation, it is more like a new engineer who comes with a computer and satellite positioning. That long string of suffixes looks intimidating, but the logic behind it is actually not complicated. LC is the long crawler undercarriage, which is more stable and better for heavy digging. LCN is the long narrow undercarriage, made specifically to deal with tight spaces and transport height limits. H is the reinforced version, and LCH is the long crawler reinforced version. K is the heavy counterweight, good for lifting heavy loads and working on slopes. And LCK is the long crawler plus the heavy counterweight. US is the ultra short swing. X is the special condition version for things like grabbing steel or handling material at the docks. And LCX is just its long crawler variant. And that G, as mentioned before, is the economy global version. These letters can be defined a little differently from region to region. So when you are looking at a machine, you still have to judge by its actual configuration. And if you cannot keep them all straight, no worries, because the ones with the largest population worldwide are always the plainest standard version and the LC version. If you line this up against Komatsu, it gets very clear. The ECAX200 era spanned an enormous range, stretching across Komatsu's PC200-1 all the way to 5. Then in ZAXIS era, the ZX200-3 corresponds to the PC200-6-7. The ZX200-5 went up against the most glorious PC200-8. The ZX206 corresponds to the PC210, and the ZX207 is currently locked in battle with today's PC211. As for the strengths, the three things people love most about the ZX200 are fuel economy, feel, and comfort. On fuel, at medium load it runs about 9 to 10 liters per hour, and the fuel money saved over a year is no small sum. On feel, its combined motion sequencing is especially natural, raising the boom while pulling in the arm, or slewing the house while throwing the bucket. All happens in one smooth flow, with no stutter and no bogging down. There's a point a lot of people overlook here. When operators praise the ZX200, what they praise is often not that it saves fuel, but that it saves effort. Because the motions are so smooth that working long hours does not wear you out as easily. And it is especially prized for the delicate jobs like shaping slopes, digging pipe trenches, and fine grading. On comfort, the cab visibility, the seat, and the control layout were all redone according to ergonomics, and with the sound insulation and air conditioning added in, you are noticeably less worn out at the end of a full day. The faults have to be told too. Any frontline 20-ton machine working the world over, once it has been run for 5 to 10 years, sees its problems concentrate in three places: hydraulics, electronics, and the undercarriage. Since the ZX200's third generation, the share of electronic control has been high. And once the ECU, sensors, wiring harnesses, and valve controls get up in years and run into harsh environments, you get occasional warnings, abnormal movements, and the eco mode failing, and fixing it cannot rely on just taking things apart and putting them back. You have to hook up a computer to read codes and check circuits. With hydraulics, once you hit power loss or sluggish movement, you also have to trace it level by level from the pilot to the main valve to the main pump, which sets the bar a good notch higher than the purely mechanical X200. The undercarriage, like on any 20-ton machine, is where the tracks, rollers, idlers, and sprockets wear down fast under conditions like mining demolition. And steel slag. And since the undercarriage parts for the long crawler reinforced versions like the LC, LCH, and LCK are pricey to begin with, the real cost of a lot of used machines is actually hiding underneath. In the undercarriage, one more thing. The Isuzu engine Hitachi has long used is fuel efficient and durable, but it is fairly sensitive to poor quality diesel, and feed it bad fuel and the fuel system and injectors are prone to throwing a fit. On the used market, the ZX203 and ZX205 are recognized hard currency, holding a status like a Toyota Prado in the used car world, where one in good condition has no trouble finding a buyer. They are roughly equivalent to the PC207 and PC208 and the CAD 320CL and 320DL. Not necessarily the flashiest leading roles, but absolutely the ones that show up the most and that you are most likely to run into. In Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and South America, these machines have often already changed hands 3 or 4 times and crossed several countries, and they are still out there making money. There is an interesting phenomenon. Ask a boss what machine he loves most, and the answer is usually Komatsu. Because it makes money, ask a mechanic, and the answer is usually Komatsu too, because it is easy to fix. But go ask the veteran operators who sit in the cab more than 8 hours a day, and quite a few of them end up choosing Hitachi. For one simple reason, it does not tire you out. So a lot of fleets divide the labor like this. Komatsu lays the foundation, CAT does the heavy work, and Hitachi grabs the jobs that are all about efficiency and getting paid by the piece. When it comes to after sales and maintenance, the ZX200 is pretty down to earth. It sits right between the old mechanical era and the highly electronic era. More complex than the X200, but not yet at the point where you cannot move an inch without a computer. The daily stuff, changing oil, changing filters, greasing, tightening, and dust proofing, is still the core, and the electronic threshold mainly shows up in deep fault finding. Its parts supply has long since become fully mature, the Isuzu filters and pistons, and Hitachi's aftermarket and salvage parts are all readily available at the parts market, while the newer models are backed by the factory's dedicated computers and remote monitoring. For a team willing to learn the principles and pick up diagnostic tools, it is very friendly. For someone who fixes purely by feel, it gets a little picky about who works on it. There is a joke among mechanics: if you cannot fix a ZX200, you cannot even hold your head up back in the village. Let us also talk about the ZX200's global network of partnerships, because Hitachi as a company understands one thing well. You cannot sell far just by importing whole machines on your own. You have to find local partners to put down roots in the big markets. The most famous chapter is the partnership with John Deere in North America. The two formally set up the joint venture Deere-Hitachi in 1988, bringing together Hitachi's excavator design and technology with Deere's brand dealer network, parts, and customer service. With each side holding a 50% stake, they built plants in Kernersville in North Carolina, Langley in Canada, and in Indaiatuba in Brazil, and excavators wearing both the Deere and Hitachi badges rolled out of these plants together. So that green Deere excavator that American operators talk about is at its core of Hitachi blood, which is also why quite a few of Deere's mid-size excavators in North America look almost cut from the same mold as the Hitachi ZX series. This partnership lasted more than 30 years, and by its 30th anniversary in 2018, the two had built over 55,000 hydraulic excavators together. But the story came to a close at the end of February 2022. When the two ended the joint venture, Deere bought out those 3 joint venture plans to keep building Deere-branded excavators, while Hitachi set up its own America's company, HCMA, switched to producing and exporting whole machines directly from Japan, and at the same time kept supplying Deere with excavators and parts under a new supply agreement. In other words, Green Deere and Orange Hitachi went from being one family to being both a supplier and a competitor. Another line runs through India. Tata and Hitachi's bond goes all the way back to a technical cooperation in 1984. And Tata's earliest construction machinery division can be traced to 1961. In 1999, this business was spun off into the independent company Telcon. And in 2000, Hitachi first took a 20% stake. Later, Hitachi's holding climbed to 40%, then to the current 60%, and the company was officially renamed Tata Hitachi in 2012. Worth mentioning is that the ZAXIS series was introduced into India right around 2003. Today, Tata Hitachi is one of the largest hydraulic excavator makers in India, holding roughly 24% of the excavator market. You could say that Hitachi's ability to gain a firm footing in the huge infrastructure market of South Asia rests on this Tata leg to stand on. China took a somewhat different route. Hitachi set up a Chinese subsidiary back in 1995 in Hefei, Anhui. Initially as a joint venture with the local state-owned enterprise Hefei Mining Machinery. Later, the joint venture was dissolved, and it was turned into a wholly Hitachi-owned subsidiary running on its own. And the city of Hefei became Hitachi's home base in China. So quite a few of the Hitachi ZX machines running on Chinese job sites are actually produced locally in Hefei. Put these 3 lines side by side and you will spot a pattern. Hitachi opened up the North American market on the strength of Deere's brand and channels, put down local roots in India through Tata, and in China tested the waters with a joint venture first before switching to full ownership. The reason you can find the ZX200 just about everywhere in the world is not only that the machine itself is good, but also that there is this partnership network, spread very wide and constantly adjusted as the situation changes. So if we had to give the ZX200 a definition, it is not necessarily the strongest, the cheapest, or the one with the largest population. But it is very likely one of the most operator-loved 20-ton machines in the whole world over the past 20-some years. The CAT 320 stands for power, the Komatsu PC200 stands for balance, and what the Hitachi ZX200 stands for is another scarce quality, precision. That is probably also why, to this day, when veteran operators bring it up, A look comes over their faces that only fellow insiders can understand.